Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion of Hegel's Lectures of World History. I'm Ahilleas, and
I'm Philip.
there's Philip. And welcome to another episode. Today we'll be discussing the division of world history, where Hegel sort of sets us up for what we should expect to come in the rest of the lectures.
Indeed, he hasn't been setting us up for the past 8 episodes in this long ass introduction.
Yeah.
But it's coming to an end today.
It's coming to an end, and soon
the end of the beginning.
And soon we'll be getting into the meat of the lectures. But yeah, so before we do though, Hegel wants to tell us a bit about how each of the stages of world history that he is going to tell us about develop from each other. He wants to give us an overview of the conceptual reasons for why he thinks we move from one stage to another. So this section is, I suppose, quite dense because it's very concept focused and it doesn't really have, there are some historical analogies to sort of help you along, but really it's about concepts.
The stuff we like.
Yeah.
The stuff that we get excited about, concepts. Yeah. Give us
a
logical structure, baby.
Do you want to get us started, Philip?
Yeah, okay. So in addition to what you've said, Ahilleas, I think we can also extract from this section certain key principles that Hegel sees unfolding in history. We might even see call it the reason for history. Like, why is there history to begin with? Well, why, it's a certain development, but what is actually developing here? I think Hegel gives us kind of a good snapshot of that here. And he starts the whole thing off with a question, like early on in this last section. The question principally concerns the form of the state. And then he goes on to talk about ethical life, sittliches Leben, and then he poses the question of whether or not ethical life is for the sake of custom. So custom, as he also qualifies, an unreflected habit. So is this the kind of what it all boils down to? Is it just the building of customs and then improving upon these customs? Is that sort of the life that we're cultivating and engaging in from start to end in history? Or is there something more to it? And I think there is absolutely something more to it, and that he calls the sort of reflective power, reflexion, of personality, the principle of subjectivity. And here we get into this really nice dichotomy that is developing here between substance and subject, which are big mega categories in Hegel's philosophy. And I found it interesting how he sort of says, well, we start out with substance, that's already there, but what isn't already there from the get-go is subjectivity, or the subject. And that what subjectivity brings to the table is the distinguishing and differentiation of what's given or what's immediately there.
Right. So he calls subjectivity the infinite form, the activity of self-distinguishing, and of the distinctions and development of unity. Substance remains at the basis. Subjectivity, the form, merely develops the unity of substance in its distinctions. So substance comes across as something unchanging, or at least something that doesn't have the ability to change for itself. Substance comes across as something that is changed by personality, by subjectivity.
Well, I don't think substance is incapable of change. It's just that it doesn't know it. It's incapable of knowing. It's like you live in a certain time period. I'm sorry?
Is it capable of self-change, self-movement?
Yeah, let's say so.
All right.
So it's like historical epochs. People are born in a certain age with certain customs, certain expectations, certain way of life. And this can just develop into the next generation. And that generation takes on the trappings of their time, and nobody's none the wiser.
Right.
So the additional change that subjectivity brings to the table is distinguishing between these generations, or between these immediacies, or the givens, or the situations.
Okay, I see. So it marks out a difference within the substance.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why I
the
think
activity of self-distinguishing.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think so. And that's why I think it's very coy of Hegel to say subjectivity merely develops the unity of substance in its distinctions. Doesn't really add anything that wasn't there. And here we have that sort of famous tautological thinking that there's no difference we see in the phenomenology. So that, it's not that we add anything to the imaginations of what's happening with substance. We just kind of reflect on it, become a bit aware of it. And that itself is the crucial difference.
Well, another way maybe is to say that we make it explicit.
Yes, of course.
We don't add anything to the conceptual structure of the substance. We just make explicit what is already there.
Except that is what is added, the conceptual structure.
Okay.
That is the addition. The explication itself is the addition.
Exactly, yes. The understanding of it as that.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, but implicit, explicit, these are kind of the royal, fully fledged, developed concepts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a road but the road there is not still long.
Okay, so then Hegel tells us that where we have to begin is the state that is still internally oppositionless, where subjectivity is not yet for itself and the subject has not yet come into its own. So Hegel is now sort of setting us up for the first stage of world history. And this is a state. So it's a state, first of all, even the simplest, most immediate stage of world history, it involves a state.
Yeah.
And we've just been talking about subjectivity and substance. In this immediate state, subjectivity has not developed the distinctions and developed these distinctions out of substance.
That's right.
Right? It has yet to come into its own. It is not yet for itself.
Right. We could say it's immersed fully in substance to the point where you can't really distinguish it from substance.
Right. Okay. And this immediate form of ethical life, as Hegel says, he calls it the infancy of history.
Yeah.
And then he says the childhood of history splits into two aspects, because the antithesis between state and subjectivity is still there. It cannot be absent. To the extent that the antithesis has not yet developed in this shape, it falls outside of it and plays out on its own. Before we unpack that, this antithesis between state and subjectivity, do you think that's the same as between substance and subjectivity?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's saying that in the beginning, well, all there is substance, except implicitly there is still a difference. It's just that the difference hasn't become explicit, become developed. It's still just harbored within substance as such.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's worth exploring a bit this idea that to the extent that the antithesis has not yet developed, it falls outside of it and plays out on its own.
Yeah, what does that really mean? How can that fall outside of it? Where would it fall into?
So I think we get an idea in the next paragraph where Hegel talks about this first kind of state as being in a realm of permanence and unhistorical history.
Right.
So then he says, it lacks this antithesis, the ideality within itself, and such a condition does not change internally, but only from without. And I think this is what he means by saying that the antithesis falls outside of it and plays out on its own. It doesn't have the dialectic. There is no negative, there's no making explicit of the implicit tension within the state, between state and subjectivity. And so all you get is this superficial development, an unhistorical history, but not one that actually pushes the dialectic forward, that makes the conceptual tension explicit.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is going on there.
Okay, but that's like very technical. Like, how can we understand this in a more kind of straightforward way? And what comes to my mind is that, well, look at various creation stories. How does the world begin? How does it come to be? Well, it's usually some deity, some god, or the god that creates it, right? They do stuff. They put in rules. They establish order, right, etc. But why? That is kind of, nope, that is not part of the account, right? That is excluded from the account. It comes later, right? It's a problem, but first of all, it's just to get the business of creation going, and then some stuff happened once creation is put in place. But why it all happened, well, that comes much later. But it has to sort of be postponed.
Okay.
But I see that as a way of excluding this antithesis, or the principle of subjectivity. Because in these creation stories, presumably the gods, the deities wanted, for whatever reason, or made a decision, or something like that, something we would associate with a person or personhood.
Yeah.
But no, that doesn't fit in, because it seems to take away from the authority of the of the account itself. And so let's just bracket that away, or just postpone it and focus on the rules, what you shan't do, right?
So kind of empty formality without any real attempt to tie together the whole process.
Yeah, formality, because there is no personality.
Okay.
And that's, I think, mainly because it's just much easier to deal with than the principle of subjectivity. It's a hard thing.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this.
And that's also why I think the focus is on not internal change, but external change. Things happening between people, or between the people and the nature, and between peoples, right? It's all various things happening from outside that are coming in and doing stuff.
Right. Yes. And I guess that's sort of, conceptually speaking, that's because subjectivity is not developing within substance. It sort of is immediate with substance. It sort of we don't see a difference between the two. And so the actions of people are not the actions of subjectivity over and above substance, developing out of substance, but just working as if they were substance.
Yeah, or that any kind of change is regarded as just another substance.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I'm thinking of the garden scene, the creation story there.
Yes.
Yeah,
I know that.
You know, it's not Adam or Eve that themselves have the idea of breaking the law. They get tempted by the snake first. Something externally comes in and tells them and convinces them so and so, right? They couldn't have had the idea themselves. Except when you do, you can, I think, put a different lens on the story and see that, well, actually, that snake is just a representation of Eve or whatever. And so it's really just a portrayal of her subjectivity.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we see this in art happening all the time, right?
Yeah. When you get an allegorical reading that tries to insert subjectivity into the action.
Yeah.
You
even get this with like state origin stories with Romulus and Remus and all the stuff, right?
Yeah. Okay, good. Then should we move on to the second thing then? So we said that there were two aspects that so history splits into two aspects because the antithesis is still there. We've spoken about the first one, an unhistorical history, and then Hegel introduces a second aspect. The state does not inwardly change and is only in conflict outwardly. States that rest on the same unchanging principle are essentially occupied with themselves and so are in continuous decline.
Yes, that's interesting. So the second aspect deals with the form of time itself.
Yeah. So Hegel, I don't know if it's worth really dwelling on this, but when we didn't mention it, but in the first aspect, Hegel mentions the spatial dimension, saying it's of no consequence here. But he still mentions it. And then he goes on to mention in the second aspect that the state also exists in the form of time. I don't know how much we can say about it, but it's just maybe interesting to note that Hegel seems to want to distinguish this immediate moment of world history in the first moments of nature, space and time.
Yeah.
But I think that could just be a rabbit hole if we pursue.
We should probably also note that because he says they're essentially occupied with themselves, they are so in continuous decline. I think they're occupied with themselves with a kind of with a certain permanence.
Yes,
that's the issue.
Right.
It's not that they occupied them with themselves. It's just that they occupied with themselves in this very static way.
Yeah. So both the aspects are static.
Yeah.
But the second aspect seems to emphasize temporal change, decline.
Right.
That seems to be the main difference. And then he concludes this second aspect by calling it ongoing unrest is an unhistorical history, the same term as he uses above.
Yeah.
So civilizations that are continuously in decline because they are essentially occupied with themselves. This looks like change. It looks like history developing and moving forward, but really it's just ongoing unrest. It is just it is undeveloped substance. There is no subjectivity here. It looks like there is, but there isn't anything going on.
Yeah, it's just a whole lot of fuss and drama, but the background unchanging principle is the same, and that's the source of the decline. Yeah.
So I mean, I wonder if that could be one way that you might just think about, I don't know, maybe like the Peloponnesian War. Yes, it's a riveting story of the struggle between Athens and Sparta, between democracy and whatever the hell Sparta was. And
they were men. They were being lads. It's democracy against lads.
But maybe, you know, that's just an example of ongoing unrest. There isn't anything internal being developed there. I'm just using that as an example.
Okay.
Of how we might, the impression I get when I read this paragraph is that Hegel is warning us against assigning importance to all historical events of change.
Yeah.
In some respect.
Yeah.
We need to look not just for the clash of substance, but we need to look for the expression of subjectivity.
Right.
And how that expression seems, and if that expression is bringing about the self-development of subjectivity.
Yeah.
the Peloponnesian War was just an example to illustrate how we might be led astray by what looks like a very important event, but which one that might not actually denote the development of subjectivity. And so, I mean, that's also one way that we might distinguish Hegel's philosophy of world history from the discipline of history. You know, a historian would be justifiably interested in the Peloponnesian War, whereas for Hegel, if it lacks that conceptual tension, then it's not really relevant for world history, philosophical world history.
Yeah, other than maybe kind of being yet again a lesson that, yep, empire building isn't going to get you anywhere. I think that's a possibly one candidate for like unchanging principle. It's like the empire building kind of deal that a lot of the ancient civilizations engaged in, and some modern ones try to still.
That's a thorny topic amongst historians.
Yeah,
whether history can teach us anything, whether there are any sort of principles that we can learn from history.
Well, if according to Hegel, there wouldn't even be history unless there was this development at work.
Development, yes, right.
Yeah.
But are there sort of principles? Are there rules of history? Does learning about the difficulties of empire building in ancient Greece inform you about the difficulties of empire building nowadays?
Yeah, I think to some extent it does. But it's more about what kind of. So I think the unchanging principle thing is all about how a certain people, a civilization, or a state views themselves, and what grants the authority to their being there in the first place. Right. And usually it tends to be kind of mythological, kind of pointing backwards to some grand time, out of which this state is just a part of that sort of great cosmic tapestry. And that is what gives justification to us being here, because we have the mandate of heaven. Oh, sorry, that's for next week.
Excellent. Very well. Very good job. Nicely tied in.
Thank you.
Okay, should we move on then to the second shape? So far we've been talking about the infancy of history. This is the first shape that sort of splits into two. And then there's the second shape, which Hegel calls the boyhood, the childhood of the world. And that is in which the states are at constant odds with one another.
Yeah.
But in as much as the state is outwardly directed, a premonition of the individual principle appears.
Yeah.
Conflict and struggle cause a self-concentration into individuality and internal self-comprehension.
Yeah, this is interesting, how the external kind of puts you right back into the internal.
Yeah,
because like when two tribes are fighting or two states are fighting, well, they're made up of people, right? And how are they going to get, the edge over one another? Well, it's going to be their organization, or how they, cheer each other on, or keep up their motivation, keep up their discipline, keep up their training, all these different things that I think become factor into this.
Yeah.
And in order to do that even better, well, what kind of appeals do you make? I think you need to start appealing to the individual, right? That, what we're going to do in this war against the Gauls isn't just good for Rome, but it's good for you.
That sounds good. Yeah. I'm sure there was a Roman propaganda poster like that. Don't doubt it for a second. So I like this because in the previous shape, in the infancy shape, we had just outward sort of interactions, external relations. And now Hegel is sort of gradually making explicit this the inner subject, the inner tension, the subjectivity.
Yeah.
And so it's the state is still outwardly directed, but it's beginning to become aware of the individual principle, as you said.
Yeah. Maybe
And
not aware explicitly as like, guys, we need to improve our subjectivity, but like, you know, how can we improve our culture and organization to beat those other guys?
There's some kind of self-concentration into individuality that leads to internal self-comprehension, something like that.
Yeah, but maybe by self-comprehension, we should understand here, like how the people in this state view themselves, right? They start shaping some sort of particular identity.
Okay, good. Yeah. I think it's interesting that Hegel locates conflict, struggle, war as the impetus for this development.
Yeah, well, him and Heraclitus.
Yeah. What is it? Civilizations are forged in the furnaces of war. Who says that?
Well, Heraclitus just says war is the father of all. Right.
I think Hegel is definitely agrees with this. And there's obviously an intuitive appeal to this. We can see how, I mean, how many movies are there, right, about plucky defenders in a battle or a war that sort of unite, develop a self-comprehension of each other and of themselves as the units or as something over and above what they were.
Right. And if they're facing, you know, difficulty, well, the way they manage that difficulty is by forming the culture and identity among themselves as a whole, right?
Exactly, yeah. Okay, but then but as you correctly said, they're not really aware of it. So Hegel writes, but this premonition first appears as powerless individuals as a universal unconscious principle.
Right.
It is not yet the light of the self-knowing personal soul.
Yep. Yeah, so I think it's again here seen just in the guise of substance, right?
Right.
They don't look at it as, you know, the people here in these struggles, they don't see themselves being the source of their own motivation and courage and so forth. No, they see Athena or, you know, something else doing the work.
Right. Okay.
Something external once again.
It's something external, but there is the beginning, the impetus of something internal.
Yeah,
but purely in response to the external.
Yes, and still only very like super implicitly still. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So I think in the first shape, I think it's all immediacy, right? There isn't even a whiff of mediation or subjectivity. But now we can see that implicitly upon reflection, there is reflection at work here.
Yeah. Good.
And then Hegel goes on to talk about how it's Greece is kind of the space where this is, or Greece is kind of like the expression for this shape, at least initially, insofar as one is still immersed in the realm of substance and immediacy. The subject, the principle of subjectivity is kind of dancing around or playing around through those substantial givens, but it's always given some sort of substantial form. You don't have the sense of beauty in and for itself, or it's always Aphrodite, or war is in Mars, right? War isn't just something in and for itself. Plato, I think, breaks with this. He starts to think about the good in and of itself, beauty in and of itself. But that's already, I think, it's like breaking out of that historical epoch.
Yeah. So you were sort of picking out, I mean, the diversity of the city-state seems to be important for Hegel, because it seems to be that the fact that you have so many different city-states in Greece, that is an expression of individuality.
Yeah, in a certain sense. I think more that it's because there's so much external competition and external conflict between the city-states that implicitly gives rise to individuality. But only as a reaction to the external struggles.
Right. And then Hegel writes something very beautiful. He says, thus Greece is the realm of beauty, the most cheerful and most graceful realm, but also the utterly ephemeral one. The quickly wilting bloom, the inwardly most restless shape, since it itself must overturn its solidity through reflection.
Yeah. Was he drunk with the Greekomania of his time? Because we do tend to have, see only the good stuff in Greece, but not the awfulness that there must have been also going through at the time.
Well, I mean, so he then goes on to say, thus constant unrest is found here.
Right.
The reflective power of personality can be sustained in unity with immediate ethical life for only a moment.
Yeah.
Reflection tears it apart.
Damn reflection.
I just wanted to point a bit at why Hegel uses the word beauty here.
Yeah, go on.
I think it is not just some Hellenophilism going on. I think there is a conceptual reason here, and that is that he sees in this stage the immediate unity of ethical life. So subjectivity and substance are explicit moments. They're not just immersed, but they are still only in an immediate unity with each other. They don't properly mediate each other.
Right. Okay. So is it like substance and subjectivity are united, but only as substance?
Exactly.
Because you said the unity itself is immediate.
I don't think as substance. I would say as substance and subjectivity, as one and the other, not as substance and subjectivity. I don't think, because the emphasis on substance, I think, has been, we've moved beyond that, I think, with the move from the age of youth, age of boyhood to the age of youth.
Okay.
I think, so in the age of boyhood, subjectivity was still just an unconscious principle. It was only a premonition of subjectivity. In this next shape, in the third shape that we have here, I think it's more than just a premonition. It's there. It's a moment in and of itself, but it's not properly, it hasn't got a real relation with substance.
What do you mean by real relation?
I mean, the moment of subjectivity hasn't posited the moment of substance as different to it yet, and there isn't then that return of reflection.
Okay, so would it be fair to say then that in this relationship, subjectivity is there, but it's not there on its own terms. It's kind of at the behest of substance.
I don't think it's one over the other. I think they're both sort of independently and equally there.
Yeah, but I think that but I think the very equality itself is something that's closer akin to immediacy and the given, and therefore of substance rather than the other thing.
I see what you mean.
So another way to look at this would be like, this is a story of being in essence. Initially, we just have being. But slowly but surely, being turns out to be more than or less than being, usually less. There is, it includes nothing and so on and so forth, until later on, following the science of logic, well, essence comes on the scene, right?
Yeah.
Which is the reflective power.
Yeah.
But in that, if we follow that as a kind of guideline for here, I would say that we're somewhere in the third part of quality of being for self.
Okay. Well, I was going to connect this actually with the idea, with the introduction to the idea.
Wow, damn son, looking ahead.
Well, that's how I'm making sense of Hegel's inclusion of the concept of beauty. I'm seeing beauty here as a concept and not as an adjective. Beauty is the immediate unity of the idea. And what
okay, fine, but he's still using immediate.
Yeah.
And that puts the weight on being, not on essence.
Well, the immediate unity of the idea is not being in essence, right? It's concept and objectivity.
Yeah, if you want to go that route, then that.
And I think that tracks. I think that tracks well with subjectivity and substance as well.
Yeah, but that's just a much tougher sale.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
So many complex categories already involved. I just wanted to keep it, nice.
You want to keep it simple. You want to always go back to being.
So another way we could look at beauty here is how Hegel talks about beauty from the lectures on aesthetics, and what really expresses beauty is the classical period, which again is linked up with Greece, ancient Greece. But there we get a reason for why it is, and that's because of form and content kind of perfectly overlapping.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if Hegel thinks that there is an overlap with his aesthetic theory of beauty in classical Greece and his world history theory of the classical Greek state.
Yeah.
He then goes on to write, for beauty unites the opposed principles, and the principle of individual freedom is precisely the opposite of natural ethical life.
Right. I think that's complete. I mean, that tracks very well with the rest of Hegel's philosophy in the art stuff. I think beauty is exactly that, right? His supreme harmony or coming together of form and content, and that the ancient Greeks really perfected that.
But then he says, right, thus constant unrest is found here.
Yeah, because it's hard work, making them sculptures and keeping that balance of that stone. It's not easy.
You think those pillars are going to balance themselves?
You gotta keep a guild of craftsmen, active and trained all the time. It's like,
so substance is present only as beautiful individuality. And the reflective power of personality through the power that subjectivity exercises vis-a-vis naive universality must elevate immediacy to thought to universality.
Yeah, which we see happening with Aristotle and Plato and the philosophers, right? They break apart this beauty
So, but let's just think about that a bit, because that's the move to the next stage, to adulthood.
Yeah. The Roman world.
Yeah.
The Greeks intuited the unity, the Romans reflected it.
Right. So the problem with Greece, with ancient Greece, is that substance is present only as individuality. It's only present in the individual, not in universality, maybe the states or universal ethical life.
Okay, yeah.
There's only a naive universality. Citizens, even though I'm not sure how that tracks with Athens, though, because citizens of Athens.
Yeah. But I think Hegel is speaking here on a fundamental level. Okay, so you have the citizens, you have the demos, you have the organization, blah, blah. But what gives the authority to these things, right? What justifies them? Ultimately, it's Athena. And then Athena is part of a whole pantheon. What justifies those guys altogether? Well, it's
Hesiod.
Other kinds of deities, other gods, but they're all individuals. All right. You never get to the universal as universal anywhere here.
Yeah, okay. Except so it's only a naive universality.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. And so the Greek individuality will have to give way to Roman universality, which is a great thing to say, Roman universality. So we step into the Roman world, into the adulthood of demanding labor, a labor that hearkens to duty, serves a universal purpose, a state, in universal principles, the laws, and that is operative neither in the free will of the master nor in its own beautiful free will.
Indeed.
So the first idea that we get from this is what makes the Roman world the presence of substance in universality is that the labor, the actions of the citizens is in service of Rome, of the ethical life.
Yeah. And I suppose maybe there is a sense, I mean, just the idea of law itself and kind of the legality and building that whole structure out itself, I think, enriches the universal. The universal isn't just mythological deity of, who had this or that want and thing they wanted to do, but it is right in and for itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives it a stronger sense of universality, in a logical universality sense.
Right, because laws are universal principles. So, and they're concrete, like they're real things. They're ideal things, but they're also real things that constrain you and reprimand you if you go against them. And so they're a universal expression of subjectivity.
Except there is no subjectivity because everybody is beholden to the same universal and they participate in that universal.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As he says, right, it's universal, individuality is submerged, Hegel writes here.
Right.
But remember a few lecture episodes back, we were talking about the Romans as go-getters, right?
Yeah.
They sort of, that's why they succeeded, because they cultivated that personal ambition. And that seems to be a moment of individuality, but it's one that is better linked up with the universal.
Yeah. So individuals attain their purpose only in the universal. Right. So the glory of Pompey is in the glory of Rome.
Which then reflects back on Pompey, because now we have Pompey.
Exactly. Yeah. And also what we spoke about last time was actually
he was a consul of Rome.
But that also takes us back to that tension that we mentioned as well between personal ambition and Rome.
Yes.
the universal.
Yes.
And this sort of so this structure that Hegel is outlining, that individuals attain their purpose only in the universal, makes sense of why Julius Caesar's actions brought about the end of the Republic.
Yeah.
Because there you have an individual who is no longer submerged in universality.
No, he is stepping out of it. He is putting himself too much in its stead, right? Which breaks with the whole system.
Exactly, yeah. I wonder if Hegel will make that same interpretation, or if he sees things differently.
But he does speak about the Roman Empire here, doesn't he?
He does. Well, he talks about the Holy Roman Empire.
No, but above that, he does talk about such an empire seems to be eternal. Right. So I think he's referring to Roman Empire as
in general.
Yeah.
Well, people spoke about the Roman Empire before the fall of the Republic.
I suppose, yeah. Because you do have like empire building before. Yeah.
Well, again, though, it will be interesting to see whether Hegel draws a sharp distinction between the fall of the Republic and what follows.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Maybe it's two sides of the same coin. The Republic is where, yeah, everybody has their purpose in the universal, but their personal ambition is being rewarded. And the flip side of that is the empire, where you do actually have individuals coming out on top, but there you have a kind of stultification, of a regression, because we're back to kind of a previous shape of statehood.
Yeah. So then in the next paragraph, Hegel seems to talk about what's happening next. He says the transition to the next principle is to be seen as the internal struggle of abstract universality against the principle of particular subjectivity. So,
yeah,
is the abstract universality the result of the submergence of the individuals?
Not only that, we can also think here about how empires actually subjugate, other peoples, and puts them on, it suppresses their individuality insofar as it suppresses their identity and culture, and sort of puts them under their own hood, right? Now, no, you're supposed to be now Romans or whatever, right?
Which renders the universal more abstract, because what it is to be Roman becomes more and more diffuse.
Yeah, and in order to maintain it, it has to become more formal.
Right.
Because it cannot be about this city in Italy anymore. It has to be about people living in France or Spain, and right, yeah. And so how can they also be Romans, right? Well, the principle has to be, as you were saying, more diffused. It has to become more formal, more general. Yeah. But that makes it more abstract, more one-sided, and so that starts butting up against the principle of particular subjectivity. I think here about the sort of local cultures, the geographical stuff, and all of that.
Right. Yeah. So the struggle between abstract universality and the principle of particular subjectivity must end with the victory of subjective singularity, because abstract universality as legality does not assume inwardly individualized form and has to have a purely arbitrary subjective singularity as impetus.
That is a dense one.
Yeah.
Because he switches subtly between particular subjectivity and subjective singularity. And I don't think we should read those as the same thing.
No, we shouldn't, no.
So so you have a backlash with empire building, with having to subjugate and suppress particular individual cultures, but
exactly.
The
particularity is always in the conflict, in the tension, in the struggle.
Yes, as it becomes in this case, yes, but the solution to that isn't to just remove the universal and give the particularity free reign, right? We shouldn't just go back to the particularity to the locality. I think that's gone. We need to cultivate or move forward with what's even more particular than this particular subjectivity, singular subjectivity. the real individual.
The king, right? The emperor.
No, I
Is that
no,
where
no,
we're
no. This
going?
is no. This is the advent of the modern state.
So the king. But what else could subjective singularity be?
Well, it's individuals.
So the subject, the principle of infinite form, has not yet substantialized itself and must therefore appear as arbitrary dominion.
Okay, yes, that sounds like
That sounds like a king, like a
yeah,
monarch.
that sounds like monarchy. Yeah.
But in the meantime, spiritual reconciliation is also produced. Individual personality is transfigured into self-subsistent universality, into self-subsistent universal subjectivity, into the divine personality. Here we have that word again, divine.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because it seems like we're just moving backwards. Because how can this not have been the case, even more so before?
So we had the tension between abstract universality and subjective particularity. That tension led to subjective singularity, monarchy, let's say.
Yeah.
But if we just focus on subjective singularity, we realize that it is what Hegel says, arbitrary dominion.
Sure. Yeah.
And he then says that I skipped this sentence, but he then says there is the suspension of the antithesis in this worldly reconciliation. So in the reconciliation between abstract universality and particular subjectivity, there is a suspension of the antithesis of the tension in the figure of the monarch, let's say.
Right.
But in the meantime, whilst we have this reconciliation, whilst we have this suspension of the antithesis, a spiritual reconciliation is produced.
Okay.
And I think, and that will then be self-subsistent universal subjectivity. And I would understand that as that moment of subjective singularity, making explicit the antithesis within it and becoming a new moment, a new shape. So a shape that has within it the universality and the subjectivity and the singularity, and develops into self-subsistent universal subjectivity.
But I'm wondering why a lot of this isn't just already in place with historical epochs before the Romans or even before the Greeks. We had monarchs before that who were very sort of harmonic in the sense of like everything kind of was in tune in society between the state and nature and all of that. So why wasn't that developing this, or that why does something that reminds one of this happen logically after the Romans?
Yeah, I'm not sure,
because is the logic padding here to empirical events perhaps a bit too much?
Our everlasting worry. Yeah, it's unclear. I think it all depends on how we conceive of the other aspects of the state and the roles they play. Is there a particular kind of monarchy that Hegel has in mind here?
Right, sure. Right. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure. That's a question we should pin and come back to when we encounter similar moments like this in history.
Yeah. probably when we actually get to those shapes in detail, he'll give us a bit more meat on the bone.
Yeah.
Regardless, I mean, what's of interest to us here is the logical structure itself, right?
Yeah.
And what are the various moves?
Yeah.
How it fits into actual history is secondary.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so then we enter the realm of self-knowing subjectivity, of subjectivity knowing its essence. And this is the principle of actual spirit.
Yeah.
And this is old age.
So if we follow along with the analogy, indeed. He calls it Germanic, but there was a helpful note, I think, from the translators or editors of this edition, and they write, the principle ultimately has nothing to do with ethnicity or language, but with the reconciliation of worldliness and spirituality, substantiality and subjectivity, state and freedom, actuality and rationality, etc. The process of reconciliation is described in highly condensed and abstract terms in the following paragraphs. So right. I think that's really what Hegel is most interested in, not the Germanic per se, or what they also say here is more to do with Europeans.
Than specifically the German state.
Yeah.
Prussia.
Because you can think of England as Germanic, America as Germanic, following the same logic that he's outlining here.
Yeah. Okay. And so we talked about the spiritual reconciliation. And he says that in the beginning, this realm begins with a reconciliation that is completed only implicitly. And that is because the enormous antithesis is exhibited, which then appears as a wrongful condition and an antithesis to be sublated. So what is he talking about here?
I suppose it's the eternal struggle between society and the individual, spirit and nature, authority of the state versus your own self-interests. I think that becomes exhibited and made explicit now, kind of, and it is such a tangled mess that just putting it out there is itself a kind of long drawn out unpacking.
Yeah.
As he called it, supreme conflict of the spiritual with the worldly.
Yes.
So what history ultimately exhibits is this core issue. Caesar and Bismarck and Napoleon, they were all just a preamble to this.
Well, because now we have because the spiritual reconciliation is meant to be the fully developed reconciliation of subjectivity and substance.
Yes, yeah.
And now it is this that is opposed to the world, and it's in conflict with the world, with the worldly.
So do you see that the substance and subjectivity kind of dilemma is itself opposed to the world? Is that what you mean?
Maybe I'm borrowing too much from the logic here, but it seems to me that we have a moment where so far the process has been the gradual expression of subjectivity with substance, and they're becoming more and more mediated with each other. Subjectivity is finding more and more appropriate ways of developing itself through substance.
Yeah.
But that doesn't ever mean, I think, or doesn't yet mean, that substance is fully subjectivity. There's like a residue of substance, a moment of substance that resists subjectivity, that isn't taken up by subjectivity.
Sure, and it has to be, right? They're not perfectly overlapping, because then they lose their own identity logically, right?
Exactly. So as I understand the antithesis, it would be the antithesis between like the immediate unity of subjectivity and substance against substance. Something like that.
Or that you have a conflict between the immediate unity of subjectivity and substance and the then mediated unity of subjectivity and substance.
Yes,
right?
of course, yeah. There's
who
no
you
substance.
are isn't just, where you're born or which culture you belong, who your parents are, etc., or the gender you're assigned at birth. No, who you are, you decide yourself in a kind of in a free decision sort of way, right?
Yep. Yeah, good, yeah. Okay.
And then this, isn't just a reflection of a particular individual, but a overall worldview of how people see themselves, right? What kind of people are we, where, such and such is allowed or such and such is not allowed. Yeah, so freedom seems, freedom comes on the table here, becomes prominent. And that seems to be the means through which substance and subjectivity is kind of has a fulfilled unity.
Right, their relation, their unity is a free unity.
Yeah.
Okay. And then a paragraph down. Right. Okay, and then so Christianity seems to be important here for Hegel.
Yep. Well, he's gonna interject religions at all these various stages.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, indeed. And in the section on boyhood, he's mentioning the Middle East, and he sort of uses the analogy of light, natural light.
Right. Yeah.
And he's going to talk about Zoroastrianism when he talks about Persia. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, religion is interwoven in this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we've got this implicit immediacy, which is the spiritual principle to which the worldly realm is simultaneously opposed. And then on the other side, we have the spiritual principle that wills to know itself as realized in the world.
Right.
So the spiritual principle is not satisfied with simply being opposed to the worldly realm. It wants to recognize itself in that world. It wants to realize itself in that world.
Yeah.
And that's how we sort of move from this initial first implicit stage to a slightly more developed one.
Yeah. So could we see this as a story of how subjectivity realizes that, well, it cannot be subjectivity without substance, and that it has to see that part of what it is or who it is also being substantial in some sense, having certain immediacies, having certain things taken for granted, having certain givens. You are part of a particular geography or whatever. You have certain things that are just given to you and that you have no decision in and you have no say in, right? So some things shouldn't be altered from the ground up. Maybe that's what's going on here.
Yeah. So there's definitely, yeah.
So it seems like to kind of bring out this struggle, it's a double struggle. So it's not just spirit against the world, but they each struggle to rid themselves of their own one-sidedness as Hegel puts it, their own untrue form.
Yeah.
So there's not just a simple kind of dualism we're dealing with here, but each of the sides kind of realize there is an issue, and they try to, in various ways, to deal with it unsuccessfully. Or at least this is kind of what gives rise to the issue, the struggle, the conflict.
Yeah.
Again, enormous conflict. It's huge.
So spirit must first have worked off its subjectivity. So if spirit is going to recognize and realize itself in the world, it needs to let go of its immediacy as subjectivity. That's
say that again.
So he writes that spirit must have first worked off its subjectivity.
Does Hegel say that?
Yes.
Okay.
And worldliness must first have rid itself of its own internal conflict. So you've got spirit that wants to realize itself in the world, but for it to do that, it can't realize itself on its own terms. It has to sublate itself, I suppose. It has to realize itself sort of in the middle, not as just immediate spirit, but as sublated spirit. This is what I take Hegel to be saying in the beginning of the last paragraph of the page 209. The spiritual principle cannot remain in its subjective immediacy, rather insofar as it has attained its objective form, the universal shape of thought, it can truly encompass external actuality.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's ridding itself of who and what it is immediately, and works on itself to develop itself.
Right.
But the development has to be in such a way that it doesn't just return back to subjective immediacy, but encompasses external actuality. And it does that by becoming substantial, right? Becoming known for certain things, for certain works, attaining skills, having a reputation, right? All of these things are kind of external to one, and yet are part of one's identity and make somebody who they are.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So all these things that we might put under the conceptual label of external actuality. And Hegel sort of pinpoints this reconciliation as the reconciliation of church and state. Maybe we can come back to that when Hegel talks in more detail, to I imagine towards the end of the lectures.
Yeah, I'm seeing this stuff more in general terms rather than just church and state. That seems way too specific.
Yeah. So the general principle is subjectivity wants to realize itself in the world, but it cannot do that as immediate subjectivity. It has to sublate its own subjectivity, almost making itself objective. It has to make itself objective, and in doing so, in ridding itself of its own subjectivity.
Yeah. So can I just say something quickly?
Yeah.
So I just want to modify something you said. I think it's right that subjectivity wants to realize itself, but not necessarily in the world. That is an additional, or like a additional qualifier that it needs to do, but it's not evident to it that it must do.
Yes, good. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
This is also part of subjectivity to learn, because it's not part of its own immediacy that it needs to step into the world and realize itself over there, right? In that substance thing.
Right. Yeah. So the sort of like the instinct of subjectivity is just to want to realize itself, and then it fails. And
it just becomes like a beautiful soul, a kind of a romantic spirit.
Yeah, exactly.
Trapped in its own
gilded cage.
Yeah.
And then exactly. Good. Yeah. And it realizes what it actually needs is external actuality.
Right.
And then this is positing itself in the world.
Sure. And we can also see this in the other way around, right? If you just go into the externality and focus on the mechanical things, well, then you lose your subjectivity. You end up with a midlife crisis at 40, and you had what is your solution? You buy a Porsche. You get another thing, right? And you think you solve your problem that way. Well, it's the whole issue is you're lacking the subjective principle, or you suppress that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and this theoretically is the end of world history.
This is thought, people.
This is thought, yeah.
Yeah, this is what Hegel, the depth of thought alone can be his principle. This is the reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just like after, as an opinion, this is really becoming explicit in our own times through psychology and sociology, how much focus there is on individual issues and social issues.
Mm-hmm.
That itself, I think, is just the beginning of bringing out this tremendous antithesis that's always been there, but now we're finally looking at it.
Right. Okay.
But it's still, we're looking at it in terms of psychology, in terms of sociology, which is still lacking, because we need to see it as a issue of meaning, right? Of philosophical, and I think we need to see it in philosophical terms, rather than more specialized fields, which always look at things in a certain way, at the exclusion of other ways of looking at it. This is precisely what philosophy itself isn't doing, because following Aristotle it's a science without a contrary.
Right. Okay. So that would be sort of, just that would be, sorry, just to tie it in with what we were looking at so far, but what you just described would be the implicit moment of the reconciliation, where subjectivity wants to realize itself. Okay.
But this is off the top of my head, fresh opinion.
Well,
but
stick around.
History is still happening, right?
Sure. Yeah, history is still happening, and the question is history still developing, or have we reached that reconciliation? Have we passed that reconciliation?
I think
we have yet to reach that reconciliation.
From our present struggles, I think we are very much hard at work. It's as Hegel also puts it, it's a struggle for spirit to bring out this work, to work on itself.
Yeah,
and I think that's precisely what's going on with the psychological and social issue. Is society is working on itself, both on the individual level and on a societal structural level, right? Because all these institutions, all these people struggling and so on, they're not contributing to the economy. It's costing people, citizens tax dollars, right? Because that is really the depth of which this is the issue, right?
My tax dollars.
Yeah.
All right, good. Okay, I think we've pretty much done this to death. We've squeezed every last conceptual drop out of this.
Actually, one thing we should bring in, Hegel brings it out at the very end. I'll just read this quote. The antithesis is overcome in and for itself, because spirituality and freedom have and find their concept and their rationality in worldliness. So rationality here also was starting to become important.
Right.
That wasn't sort of clear in the earlier shapes of history, but it becomes very clear at the end of this shape. So it's like at the beginning of history, it's all about the external factors, the action of, vis-a-vis others, and thinking that who you are is just who you conquer and stuff like that. But it turns out that what's more important is who you are and and how you behave and orient yourself in the world. And that what has to be in tune isn't just the practical element, the mechanical stuff, but also the theoretical, and they have to sort of overlap with one another.
They have to mediate each other, right?
Right, because you can have great satisfaction in crushing your enemy, and hearing the lamentation of their women, right, and all that. But you will be unable to justify it. You'll have difficulty justifying it.
Yeah.
Right, and that is an imbalance in this dichotomy of spirituality and worldliness. And so the practical stuff has to change, or you have to find the theoretical solution. But it's like you have to change both of them at the same time until they can start to sort of let's not be at one, but
harmonize,
reconcile. I don't want to use harmony, because that sounds like too much like substantial unity, the stuff we had in the second shape.
Okay.
I think that beauty is a good expression of harmony.
Yeah, exactly.
But what the business we're dealing with at the end of the fourth shape, that's a harder one. It's tougher.
Yeah, reconciliation is an interesting word. I wonder what the German is, because you don't see that word very often, and it allows each moment its due. When you reconcile two things, you don't collapse them into each other, but you have I'm going to say harmony again, but I don't want to say harmony. Just imagine I'm not saying harmony, but you have a harmony of two distinct moments that remain themselves.
Yeah, so the German, if this is what Hegel uses, I don't have the German text in front of me, but the German translation for reconciliation is Versöhnung.
Okay.
Just similar to Norwegian Forsoning.
Lovely little language trivia there. Thank you very much.
Yeah. we have a nice sort of thing going on, as a hot phone line straight to the logos of Geist.
Yeah, reconciliation. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a coming together where both are uniquely respected, but that this is possible as a new event that isn't a recovery of something that was there before. It's a saving that only is actualized in the moment of the reconciliation and not before.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So it's a novel retrieval,
which is just the explicit development of what we began with.
Indeed. Once again, we end up with the explicit and implicit.
Exactly. We're going to finish every episode with this. Speaking of which, I believe Philip has a reading from William Shakespeare.
From Billy G. Shakespeare?
So Philip shared this with me one day, and I just thought this was particularly apt for the concluding episode of the last episode before we begin the actual world history. So Philip, please, without any further ado, give us which sonnet is it?
This is sonnet 55.
Sonnet 55.
And I apologize for all the expert Middle English medievalists. I probably butcher the pronunciations. Not marble, nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme, but you shall shine more bright in these contents than unswept stone besmeared with sluggish time. When wasteful war shall statues overturn, and broils root out the work of masonry, nor Mars his sword, nor war's quick fire shall burn the living record of your memory. Gainst death and all oblivious enmity, shall you pace forth, your praise shall still find room, even in the eyes of all posterity. That wears this world out to the ending doom. So, till the judgment that you yourself arise, you live in this and dwell in lovers' eyes.
Perfect. Wonderful.
Amazing.
And what's dwelling in our eyes is the rationality of the idea.
Could not have put it better myself.
Okay.
So that finally rounds up the introduction to the lectures on history of world history. Now we're gonna actually begin.
What an introduction, yeah. Yeah, so from next week, we'll be talking about the Oriental world, what Hegel considers to be the beginning of world history, and we'll begin with China.
We're gonna begin in China.
So that is promising to be very interesting.
Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see what he thinks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as always, let us know what you think about what we spoke about today. Leave a comment, and we will discuss it in the following episode. And I think that's all from us, right, Philip?
Yes. Yep. Thank you for tuning in, and we wish you a good day.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.